My name is Jocelyn, and some people say I'm born with a gift, but it feels like a curse. I can see things, mainly people who have passed on from this life that still wander this world, also known as ghosts. Some do not know that they are dead, while others are bound to places or to people for whatever reason. I see them quite frequently, and I try to ignore them. If they know that you can see them, they will bother you, but if you ignore them, they will go away. Despite my gift and all of my experiences, this isn't a ghost story. It's something much, much darker. All of my life, I have learned to cope with my gift, and almost found a way to rid myself of such a burden. I grew up in the city and would see just as many spirits as I would people, which made my developing years very difficult. It wasn't until I was around 7 or 8 until I realized that these spirits weren't actually a part of my physical world. For years, I've been seeing people that specialize in such areas to help reduce my connectivity to the spirit realm and connect to other things like nature. Nature has an effortless beauty that makes connecting to the world a pure experience. Me and my boyfriend moved into the country to better help get in touch with nature and to limit my connection with spirits that have passed. We moved to southern Idaho, just outside of a small town, about 10 years ago. The town was small, but had just enough of what we needed to live comfortably. During my time there, I maybe saw a handful of spirits that were just passing through, and I was able to lose most of my gift to see spirits. On the plus side to moving to Idaho, my boyfriend's family lives nearby. My boyfriend has 2 brothers, Riley and Caleb, both of which you would consider outdoor people that like their toys and to go camping whenever they could. They were both married to women that had very similar interests as us, making us natural friends, yet I didn't tell them about my gift. One brisk morning, we get a call from my boyfriend's brother, who lived down the street, saying that he wanted to take us out 4-wheeling and go camping over the weekend. I was currently in between jobs, and my boyfriend had a very flexible job that made spontaneous trips like this possible. We would go camping all over, never in the same place twice. It was their family rule to always try something new, in order to live life to the fullest, or something. That's what they said, at least. This was fine, but it did make finding new places to camp somewhat difficult. I guess one of the brothers was able to find a place that looked perfect to ride dirt bikes when he was on a logging site that they ended up having to abandon for unknown reasons. We were given coordinates to this camping site by one of the brothers. It's basically in the middle of nowhere. Riley tells us that he's able to get off work early and that he'll go and set up camp for us. We pack up and drive to where the coordinates take us, and we arrive at this dirt road that leads us into this heavily wooded area. The coordinates that he gave us were very specific. Without them, we would not be able to find this trail since the Google Maps yielded us no results. I could see why a logging company would be interested in this area. As we drove down this dirt path, I began to feel uneasy, a feeling I haven't felt in some time. I sense as if I'm about to see a spirit, but I don't see anything. It has been many years since I've felt like this, so it catches me off guard. We can't stay here, I tell my boyfriend. I have a bad feeling. He stops driving and seems concerned. Can you see anything? He asks. I look around the area trying to see where this feeling is coming from, but I can only see trees. Well, no, not exactly, I respond. He nods his head and says, well, let's at least give this a try. Maybe the feeling will go away. The deeper we go into the woods, the feeling gets worse. I'm about to say something again, but we finally see Riley and Caleb's campsite. My boyfriend seems excited and pulls into the campsite next to their trucks that are hauling 4-wheelers and dirt bikes. Upon arriving to the campsite, I see it. I can see a spirit of what seems to be an old man standing right next to our campsite. I immediately freeze as I'm reminded of my gift. It had been many years since I was able to see a spirit, so I was caught off guard, but I tried to play it off as no big deal. The old man's ghost is greatly disfigured. It looks as if it was mauled by some sort of animal that lived in the woods. I noticed the clothing of the spirit. It was somewhat modern, which told me that the spirit had recently passed away. The spirit of the old man didn't say anything. It just stood there, covered in blood, and put his finger to his lips, as if he wanted me to be quiet. As this happened, I was then greeted by my boyfriend's brothers, Riley and Caleb, as well as their wives. This brief distraction caused me to lose focus on the old man, and when I looked back to where he was standing, he was gone. In the past, when I would see spirits, I would do my best to ignore them. However, I was perplexed as to why the ghost wanted me to be quiet. I felt as if he was trying to warn me. The feeling of darkness seemed to lift ever so slightly, but still hung in the air like the smell of earth after a heavy rain. The sun was beginning to set, so my boyfriend asked me to help get her stuff set up. "Hey Jocelyn, a little help with the tent?" he said while messing with one of the tent poles. I walked over and debated on telling him what I saw, but I felt like if I did that, it would be ruining the trip for everyone. I swallowed my conflictions and decided that since the spirit of the old man was gone, that he would hopefully stay away. There was no need to worry anyone. Soon after we got the tent up, we walked over to the group who was surrounded by a cozy fire that illuminated a small cove of trees that it was under. The sun had not completely set, but the trees took away what little light it had to offer. In terms of seclusion and beauty, we had certainly found the perfect spot. The area was fairly damp due to a recent rain, which made finding new firewood a bit of a task. Most of the trees nearby were green with life, so finding any dried up branches or fallen logs would require us to venture out of our small bubble of light and safety and into the darkness. Thankfully, Caleb was insightful enough to gather a small bundle of wood prior to us arriving. However, the bundle would not last us all night. The fire burned a bright glow that, combined with the pleasure of the company that surrounded it, melted the feelings of darkness and danger away. I was good friends with Riley and Caleb's wives, so we were able to hit it off rather easily. We hung out around the campfire, having a good time drinking beers, catching up since the last time we saw each other. The boys were busy inspecting the motorbikes that they towed along to make sure that they were ready for tomorrow. After what felt like a while, and perhaps too long, we finally came together to start cooking dinner. Thankfully, we brought a propane stove, but the fire was nearly dead. We assigned Riley to cook our burgers while we all went out to find more firewood. My boyfriend and I ventured off into the dark woods. I had a bright blue LED light that seemed to pierce the thick fog that hung in the air, providing a small cone of artificial light. The ground and the nearby trees were still wet from the rain earlier. This made finding firewood very difficult. We figured that the further we ventured, the higher chance we would find some dry wood. While we hiked, I decided to share what I saw earlier about the spirit of the old man. My boyfriend seemed shocked, since it had been years since I'd seen one. He probably thought that I'd lost the gift at this point. He stopped walking and looked at me. "Jocelyn, are you going to be okay? What do you think the spirit wants?" he asked. I told him I wasn't sure. I left out the part of the spirit telling me to be quiet. I figured it wasn't important. I told him I think I'll be fine, but I got a bad vibe from these woods. A light rain began to fall as I was telling him, and we raced back to the campsite empty-handed. We were the first to come back, other than Riley, who stayed back to cook. Riley welcomed us back, although he gave us a hard time for not bringing back any wood. The group slowly came back, one by one, with wet wood. Everyone except for Caleb. We didn't notice too much since we were trying to stoke the fire with wet wood. After we got the fire roaring again, we noticed that Caleb hadn't come back. We were about to start eating dinner without him when he finally returned. Caleb was one of those guys that was never afraid of anything, or at least that's what he said. Something definitely spooked him out in the woods, because he could not stop looking over his shoulder, as if something was following him. When Caleb finally got back, we asked him, "Caleb, what took you so long?" You could tell he was conflicted with the answer he was about to give. He hesitated and waited, and then said, "It's nothing." Most of the group disregarded what he said, but I didn't. I felt the same way. I felt uneasy. We finally then had dinner, which was delicious. Riley did a great job on cooking the food. As we had dinner and started talking, the bad feelings seemed to evaporate. Whatever made Caleb feel uneasy out in the woods was clearly not bothering him anymore. A couple of hours passed and we continued to have a good time. I don't know who it was, but someone suggested that we tell the scariest story that we know. Personally, I don't like scary stories since I practically live one every day. Despite me not liking them, I did not object. We decided to go in order, giving each other enough time to think of a scary story. I started and I told some story about a golden arm or something that I heard when I was in girls' camp many years ago. I didn't remember all the details and I think I botched the ending, but nonetheless, everyone seemed to enjoy it. We finally got around to Riley, who told us a scary story about skinwalkers. This instantly made me uneasy, since I believe in them. I believe in them to the point that I won't say their name. I think that it somehow draws them to you. As Riley was telling his story about, well, I could tell that Caleb was looking around camp and over his shoulder. He was feeling uneasy again. Riley finally finished his story, which felt like forever, and everyone was on the edge of their seats. I think the mixture of the story, as well as the environment that we were in, made it extra scary. We finally decided to call it a night around 1 a.m. We wanted to get up early and ride dirt bikes. As we were going to bed, I couldn't help but notice that Caleb was shining his flashlight off into the woods, as if he was looking for someone. The night was difficult for me. I found that every sound out in the woods made me jump and I couldn't quite fall asleep. My sleep was disturbed throughout the night and I woke up exhausted. In the morning we started breakfast as usual. Everyone seemed to be exhausted from the lack of sleep, especially Caleb. I remember at one point Caleb asked, "Did anyone else hear that sound off in the woods last night? It sounded as if someone was screaming." Everyone looked surprised, but no one can confirm that they heard the sound as well. Despite the events and our lack of sleep, we decided to stay and ride our dirt bikes throughout the forest. As I was eating breakfast, I could see the spirit of the old man again. He continued to put his finger to his lips as if he wanted me to be quiet still. But this time, he did something different. He finally spoke to me and said, "It knows you're here." The spirit then disappeared. I sat in complete awe of what just happened. What was the spirit trying to warn me of? I finally come back to reality and I see that everyone is starting to put on their riding gear. Normally I'm all for riding, but considering the circumstances, I do not want to leave the camp. Thankfully, one of the brothers' wives was a couple months pregnant, so it was the perfect excuse for me to stay back and keep her company. The group decides that they'll ride for a couple of hours and then meet back up at noon for lunch. I stay back at camp and just keep an eye out the fire, as well as talking with one of the wives. Noon eventually rolls around, and everyone but Riley shows up for lunch. Knowing Riley, this was his typical behavior. He was a bit of a wild card. I ask if we should wait for him before we have lunch, but my boyfriend tells me that he probably found this awesome trail and that he's not hungry anyways. The group then eats lunch and leaves before Riley can return. No one seems to be worried about Riley other than me. Later in the day, as I'm sitting back at camp, I finally see Riley, but he's not riding his dirt bike. He's walking. I notice that his clothes are bloodied and tattered. Riley seems to be walking fine, but I notice that something is off about Riley. That bad feeling I felt earlier comes back 10 times worse. Naturally, I'm concerned about Riley's condition since he seems bloodied. But before I can say anything to him, the old man's spirit appears next to Riley, and Riley can see him. Riley doesn't say anything. He just stares at the old man and looks back at me. He puts his finger up to his lips and goes, "Shh," before both of them disappear. It finally dawned on me what has happened. Something killed Riley in these woods, and he came back to warn me. The wife that stayed back that was pregnant was taking a nap, so I didn't want to bother her, and everyone else was out riding. The hours dragged on as I waited back at camp alone. I made sure to keep the fire going, and I collected enough wood to last us many nights. The group finally returned after what felt like a lifetime. I ran out to greet them and was going to tell my boyfriend what I saw, but to my surprise, I saw Riley being assisted by my boyfriend as Riley struggled to walk normally. I immediately screamed to my boyfriend that he wasn't with Riley, but with something else. Naturally, my boyfriend was confused and stopped walking. He started walking towards me and asked, "What did you say?" Riley was now on the ground and he was convulsing. I ran up to my boyfriend and I whispered loudly in his ear, "I saw Riley's spirit. He's dead. I don't know what that is. That isn't Riley." My boyfriend took a step back and asked me, "Jocelyn, have you been drinking today?" Before I could give an answer, the thing that was impersonating Riley started to shapeshift and let out a loud scream. The group began to immediately panic as they saw the horrors unfold in front of them. The creature began to look less like Riley and more like an emaciated werewolf. Caleb was thankfully right next to his truck and was able to go inside and pull out his shotgun. He let out 3 shots, but unfortunately were not effective at that range. The creature, for some reason, was particularly drawn to me and started to charge at me. At this time, Caleb was able to close the gap and was much closer. He let out 2 more shots, one of which hitting solid. A good chunk of flesh blew off the creature, and it was enough to scare it off into the woods. We were all left there in silence. We were completely stunned as to what just happened. Something was able to kill Riley, and even worse, was to take his form. Had his spirit not come back to me and tried to talk to me, I probably would not have noticed the difference. We obviously got out of there in record time. We called the police and told them what had happened. At first, the authorities thought that we were either on drugs or drinking. Granted, our story was rather out there, but nonetheless, it was the truth. The authorities finally believed us, at least enough to send out a search party, but we never did find Riley's body. We did find his new dirt bike, although it was mangled up pretty badly. As long as this story is, this unfortunately is not the end. Looking back, my boyfriend and I both think that, since he told us that story about skinwalkers, that he was targeted by one. We have made a promise to each other not to say the name. Life as we know it has never been the same after. We have missed Riley dearly and I've started to have these really awful nightmares about that creature. My sleep pattern has gotten worse and I've been told by my boyfriend that I start to sleep talk. The dreams have gotten so severe at certain points that I have woken myself up from screaming. Unfortunately, one night I was jolted awake by my boyfriend who was shaking me. He woke me up and said, Jocelyn, do you know what you just said?" I tried my best to wake up, but I was still dazed and confused. "Jocelyn, you just said the word. You just said Skinwalker." I could feel a heavy weight in my stomach as I realized what had just happened. I'd accidentally said Skinwalker in my sleep. Now only time will tell what will happen to me. Having seen the success of Operation Wendigo, Agent Borsky was hand-selected for a special reclamation project named Dark Reach. For most of the materials of the operation, Dark Reach was considered classified since it was an ongoing operation, but some exceptions were made to fill in Agent Borsky. Long story short, a secret science base in the middle of nowhere had been compromised by unknown combatants. Agent Borsky sat skeptical when reading the mission briefing. How do we not know who the combatants are when it's a secret science lab? Surely we must have some idea of who these people are. The mission director was amused by Borsky's intellect and boldness. You're right, Borsky. We do have an idea with who is responsible, but nothing definitive. Since I have the clearance and the authority, I'm going to level with you. In 2009, our scientists made a breakthrough with time and space technology. They were able to create a portal to another dimension, or so we think. We have sent some people through with equipment, but the equipment is always immediately destroyed, and no one has ever returned from the portal. We think the conditions in the other dimension are too harsh for human life, so we took another approach. Borsky's eyes were wide with dismay. So who are the combatants taking over this lab? An advisor leaned over to the mission director and whispered something for a few seconds. The mission director nodded and said to the advisor, "You're right, he deserves to know." Long story short, the director told Borsky that the only thing that they could think of that could survive difficult environments would be something that could shapeshift. They just so happened to have collected an asset from the National Park Skinwalker incident, and they used that to send through the portal. They're guessing that what has ever happened on the other side of the portal has caused the creature to adapt to this unearthly thing. We're gonna send you in there and just make sure that the portal is turned off. It's a simple assignment, but you will have to go alone, and there will be no backup. Borsky was surprised by the no backup. Why don't I get any backup? The mission director responded and said, "There's a good chance that whatever this thing is will manipulate your mind and shapeshift into your partner. That's why we have to send you alone." Borsky nodded and accepted the mission. They were able to give him gear needed for the mission, and they were able to relocate him out to the secret lab. The lab's entrance was well hidden, but also guarded by multiple people carrying machine guns. The lab looked like a door that was simply on the side of a hill. If there weren't any people there guarding it, he wouldn't have thought anything of it. Borsky was loaded with a machine gun, as well as wearing body armor just in case anything happened. One of the guards told him right before he entered not to talk to it. He took the advice and went inside. Upon entering the heavily sealed door, he could hear the latches close behind him, sealing him inside. He noticed that the power to the facility was off, and that he was immersed in darkness. Thankfully, he had an LED light on the end of his rifle, so he turned it on. He continued down the long hallway. He was thankful to see the red glow of emergency lights above. It must have been the backup power. Borsky was able to notice that the further he went into the science base, the more sticky the ground was beneath him. Not a great sign. There was no personnel left over in the lab, so he had to slowly make his way through on his own. Borsky's attention was at high alert. He was keeping his eyes peeled for that creature lurking in the darkness, but thankfully he saw no signs of it. He was hoping that he would just find the portal, shut it off, and get out of there without having to see or hopefully talk to that creature. That hope, however, was dashed when his flashlight caught something at the end of the hallway. "Identify yourself," he shouted down the hallway, but no response. He slowly stepped closer and closer, hoping that one of the scientists were able to survive. Right before he was able to identify what he was looking at, the creature or thing bolted off to the left down a long hallway. Borsky tried to give chase, but was soon caught off guard when he looked down one of the hallways and saw a door glowing orange. Before he could walk down the hallway, he heard a voice in his mind. "Adrian, I don't want to kill you." Adrian was Borsky's first name, which no one ever referred to him as. "Adrian, you need to leave the portal alone. Humans need to suffer." Borsky responded out loud. "You know I can't let you do that. I have to shut it off." Adrian slowly inched his way down the hallway while talking to this creature. "The portal has shown me so much, Adrian. You should see as well." "You know it will kill me. I can't do that." Adrian continued to step closer and closer to the door. The orange glow of the door got brighter. Borsky was about 10 yards away from the door when his flashlight caught something at the end of the hall. Despite the figure being at the end of the hall, he knew immediately what it was. It was his mother, right before she'd gotten in a car crash. She was even wearing the outfit that he last saw her in. She didn't speak out loud, but in his mind. "Adrian, dear, please don't do this. You can come back to me. The portal will send you back to me." His mother continued to step closer and closer, slowly down the hall. Borsky lowered his weapon just enough so he wasn't pointing his gun at her. "Can it really send me back? Is it possible?" he responded. Yes, it most certainly can. Don't turn it off." The figure that looked like his mother was now close enough that he could see the features of her. Her skin looked bloated, her eyes were dark and black. Her limbs looked twisted and out of place. The image of her was so repulsive that it immediately snapped Borsky back to reality. He immediately raised his rifle and began to fire. He unloaded his magazine into what was clearly not his mother. The creature immediately began to flail and scream while running down the hallway. Borsky made a dash for the room with the orange glow. Upon entering, he was able to see what was clearly a portal to another dimension, or at least what looked like one. Borsky was able to quickly discern what was the power source for this device, and immediately shut it down. Upon doing so, he quickly left the room and made his way back to the entrance. This would mean that he would have to go back into the hallway with that thing and make it all the way back. Borsky quickly left the room and sprinted back, all the while hearing screams that were a mixture of his mother as well as some feral beast. He stopped to look behind him and shined his flashlight, not seeing anything, but hearing the screams getting louder and louder. It sounded as if whatever it was getting closer to him, but he couldn't see anything. To his complete horror, he was able to shine his flashlight up and see that the creature was crawling on the ceiling in the image of his dead mother. This was the most horrific sight he'd ever seen in his life. Borsky was completely stunned in fear. The creature then lunged at him before he could react and pinned him to the ground. Right before the creature was able to bite his throat, a jolt of electricity shocked the creature in the neck and it jumped back. Lights to the lab turned on, and personnel filled the hallway. Multiple agents with weapons came out of the doors, and were quickly able to subdue the Skinwalker. Out of the crowd of agents came the mission director, smoking a cigar. "Agent Borsky, you successfully completed the simulation. Congratulations."
"County calling Unit 4, my radio chirped. 4, I responded. Unit 4, respond code 2 to a one-car motor vehicle accident. Old Route 33 in the area of mile marker 44. Caller states he hit a deer. Vehicle inoperable. I signed and put down my phone, putting my Chevy Tahoe in gear, and gently pulling out of the parking lot I was comfortably sitting in. Unit 4 copies. Responding, I said into the radio, putting it back on its holder. Roger, Code 4. Time of dispatch 0239. Working third shift has its perks. Slow nights. Not much to do, especially in such a rural county here in Montana, where the only crime seemed to be boredom. Having been born and raised here, I knew this area like the back of my hand. I could navigate it in the dark, hell, blindfolded, and I could tell you exactly where I was solely from the ground I was standing on. Not much really happens of note here. The people kept to themselves. They were friendly, humble, and kind. Some people worked in the city close by, but most worked on their farms. They were hunters, homebodies, people preferred to their own solitude rather than the hustle and bustle of bigger cities and towns. The county I worked in as a deputy sheriff was large, so large in fact that it took over an hour just to get from one side of my patrol route to the other. It didn't bother me, and since most people here owned firearms, break-ins and property crimes were seldom. Our job was mostly to wrangle up the drunks at closing time and chase the cows that always seemed to wander out of their pastures. Tonight seemed to be no different. A passing motorist hit a deer, quite common really, especially with the large amount of space between houses and people. Animals pretty much had free roam at the place. But I'd come to learn quickly tonight wasn't like most nights. Tonight would also show me that solitude, while often brings peace, can also bring horrors untold. The red and blue lights of my Tahoe piercing through the moonlit sky, while the terrain changed from asphalt to gravel and dirt. Old Route 33 was never paved. The county maintained it, but decided to keep it the tradition of dirt, same as how our settlers traveled back in the day. The bumpy road shifted me in my seat, making me groan with each bump. I passed mile marker 6. I still had a long way to go before reaching the motorist. Reaching for the stereo, I winced as the usual station I listened to was only an ear-piercing static. Weird, I thought to myself. Reception usually stays until I at least hit marker 20. I thought nothing of it, turning off the radio and instead listening to the gravel and dirt push from underneath my tires. The headlights of the SUV pushed far ahead, along with the flashing lights of the roof of my patrol car, giving me a clear view of what was ahead. I didn't go too fast. After all, how far can an inoperable car really go? He'd still be there when I got there. Besides, the last thing I needed was to hit an animal and ruin my car trying to get to him in the first place. I sighed and leaned back in my seat, wishing morning would come and I could go to sleep. The miles kept coming, passing mile marker 17, not even halfway there. If it wasn't for the constant shaking and rumbling of the loose stone and rocks beneath the car, I may have easily drifted off. The road, straight as an arrow, kept going and going and going. Wait, since when was there a tree on that side of the road? I asked myself. A white birch tree, beautiful and standing tall, was always on the west side of the road. It was one of the few trees on this road. But tonight, it was on the east side. I slowed my cruiser to a stop, checking the GPS on the windshield. No, I'm heading southbound, I said softly to myself. That tree was never on that side. I sat there looking at the tree. It was the same one I had my first kiss under. It was the same tree I lost my virginity under, but why was it there? Must be the lack of sleep, I chuckled to myself, pushing down on the accelerator slightly. Although I played it off as nothing, the thought still creeped in my head. Why was that there? There were very few trees on this road. Hell, it was known as the Rolling Road for a reason. You could see miles on end on either side with no obstruction in sight. The road continued on, the lights still shining in front of me. I chuckled. I really did need to get a decent sleep schedule, I said to myself, shaking my head to keep the sleep away. I passed by mile marker 15. Wait, that can't be right. I just passed 19, I said to myself, stopping my cruiser and backing up. The sign said mile marker 20. The hell? I whispered to myself. I put my cruiser back in drive and pulled forward, shaking my head once more at what I saw, or at least what I thought I saw. I was getting worried. I thought working the hours I did at some point would start taking a toll on me, but why now? I've been working third shift for over 3 years. I've just kept myself caffeinated. There was no reason my brain would fog twice like that in one night. I looked at the clock on the dashboard, 3:03. I still had 3 hours left on my shift, and I knew that as long as I got home, I'd be sleeping. Marker 22. All right, halfway there, I whispered to myself. Generally, I was a pretty static man. Growing up in a military family meant fear wasn't really an option. Emotions weren't either. So, when I was scared, it was answered with anger or disapproval. Signing, I kept trudging down the road, keeping tabs on the miles ahead, hoping the time would pass faster to clear this call and get the hell out of this road and into my bed. Another mile marker sign was coming up. 29. I was getting closer, thankfully. But it didn't read mile marker 29. Rather, it was missing. The stump of the missing sign was there. The pole still stood, but the sign was missing. I pulled my cruiser to a stop and got out, shining my flashlight on it. Unit 4 calling county, I said with the sign. There was no answer, which was weird. Each patrol car had a radio repeater in it, which made sure we could always be in contact with dispatch. I checked my radio. It was on, the channel was right. There was no reason I shouldn't be hearing back. Unit 4 calling county, I said again, this time in a more aggressive tone. No response once more. I pulled out my phone but saw that there was no cell service. Again, this was weird, since there were towers sporadically throughout the fields, making sure people had contact even in the most isolated locations here. Nevertheless, I took a picture of the sign, making a note in my phone to call Public Works and let them know that one of their signs was gone. Probably some kids, I thought to myself. I looked at the photo, making sure it wasn't blurry or anything, but something caught my eye. 2 glowing orbs were seen in the far back of the photo. I was shaking and lifted my flashlight to where the orbs were in the photo. My flashlight was powerful, shining far into the darkened night, far into the field. But I saw nothing. It was empty. And that's another thing. It was quiet. Very, very quiet. Even at night you could hear the crickets, the low murmur of a resting animal, even the soft shuffle of the insects moving. It was that quiet. Tonight, the only sound was the low hum of the idling engine. I looked at the photo once more and back into the field. Maybe it was just a reflection. Maybe the sign holes produced this from the flash, I reasoned with myself. Surely, there was an explanation. I didn't want to stay longer than I had to. I got back in my cruiser and tried the police radio once more. Unit 4 calling county, I said nervously. I heard a crackle. Better than nothing, but still, no response came from the dispatchers. I switched the channel to the one that the state police used. They had a barracks in our county. They helped us on calls from time to time. Deputy Steele calling state police. Any trooper on the air? I said into the radio. No response. An eerie silence once more filled the car. That's not right, I said, double-checking to make sure I had the right channel. I did, and yet no one answered. Now I was scared, but I still had a call to respond to. Putting it back in drive, I kept moving down the road, dread filling me as I drove further away from civilization. Mile marker 33, 34, 35. I was making good progress, and everything was normal. I chuckled to myself, knowing I was working myself up for nothing. At night, people get scared. People fear the dark. You can't blame them for that. See, I was told it wasn't the dark we fear, rather what could be in the dark. But with 2 bright headlights and enough emergency lights to ravel 30 Christmas trees, darkness was no match. And yet, why could I barely see the road in front of me? The previous mile marker's sign came from what seemed like nowhere, where they should have been illuminated pretty far away from my headlights even at a good distance. I came up on mile marker 36. The sign, like the previous, appeared from what seemed to be like nowhere. But what caught me off guard this time was a cruelty painted 6-6 right after the first one. I stopped my cruiser and got out, signing. Dang kids. Funny devil number, I said to myself. I snapped another photo of the sign. Do I dare to look at it? Do another set of orbs await me? I need to make sure it was a good photo for my reports. Thankfully, no mysterious balls of light greeted me from the screen. I signed and put my phone back into my uniform pocket, looking at the vandalized sign. I crouched down, looking at the crudely sprayed painted sign. Wait, that's not spray paint, I said, looking closer at it. Was that blood? Spray paint isn't that thick. It isn't that drippy, unless it was fresh. I reached out a finger daringly and touched it. It didn't smell like paint. No, it smelt of iron. Blood. Unit 4 calling county requesting assistance, I said nervously, begging, no, praying for an answer. Alas, no one would come, and I was met yet again the silence of the night. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and even though it was quite possibly a crime scene, I had to reach that stranded motorist. If his car truly wasn't working, he could get hypothermia out here. I looked at my watch, making sure to note the time for the report. 3:03 a.m. That can't be, I said to myself, completely dumbfounded that no time had passed. I had crossed miles of land, miles that should have taken at least 15 minutes to get to where I was when I last checked the time. I shook my watch, tapping on the screen. The time didn't change. My phone said the same, 3:03 a.m. I stood up and quickly walked back over to the patrol car, getting in and shutting the door. The dashboard clock said the same, 3:03 a.m. Slamming the cruiser into gear, I floored the pedal, the roar of the engine shredding the otherwise quiet ride. I had to make it to the motorist. I had to get the hell out of here. I wasn't sleepy anymore, adrenaline pumping through my body and fear riddling my bones. Darkness, silence, fear. 3 perfect ingredients for a horror movie, and yet this was real. It was raw, and it was happening to me. The mile signs flew by me, 37, 38, 39, 40. I was at 40, and I only had 4 more miles to go. At 60 miles per hour, even though the road wasn't suited for this speed, would let me reach the car in about 4 minutes. That's all I needed before seeing another human. 4 minutes. I let out a sign of relief. I could do this. I was close. I was going to make it. Through the darkness came a shape that was in the middle of the road. I slammed on my brakes, the wheels hurtling gravel and dirt all around me while the figure came into view. My breath was swift, chest tight and heart pounding. A deer. A frickin' deer. I laughed to myself, taking a deep inhale. Damn, I laughed, running a hand through my hair. You scared me. The deer was facing me, his tall antlers reflecting slightly against the headlights and emergency lights of my patrol car. I bleeped the siren, and yet he didn't move. He kept his stare straight at me, not moving. Come on, buddy, I said, turning on the siren for a few seconds. Again, he didn't move, staying still. Literally a deer in the headlights, I laughed, putting the cruiser into park and getting out. Come on, buddy, mush, go, I bellowed. He didn't move, nor did his eyes. I was a hunter. I've known plenty of deer that can spot a human hundreds of feet away. The slightest sound could scare them off, yet the siren nor my yelling scared him. I took 2 steps forward, hand on my pistol, getting closer to it. Buddy, hey, I whispered to it, making a clicking noise with my tongue to try to get its attention. The deer stayed staring at my headlights, unmoving, unshaken. Stepping heel to toe, making as little noise as possible, I approached the animal. I was mere feet from it, and yet it didn't move. I reached out and touched it. Cold. Very cold. Fur was warm even after its death. The fur is always warm. I reached to pat its side to get it to move away. When an open hand, I gently patted the side of the deer. "Go," I bellowed. He didn't move. He fell over, stiff as a board, bouncing a bit as he hit the ground. He was dead. Shaking, panting, I stepped backwards, shaking my head. "The hell is going on?" I asked myself aloud, looking around me. I looked up. I knew I had to go. The moon and stars that filled the night sky were gone. It was black, like the moon was never a thing, like stars ceased to shine. This wasn't normal. It was a clear night only an hour ago, and the forecast was supposed to be clear. I took another look at the deer, still laying lifeless on the ground in front of my patrol car. With a shaky hand, I opened the door to my police car, getting back in and shutting the door. Slamming it back in drive, I floored it, moving around the deer and racing down the road. There has to be an explanation for that, I thought to myself. It couldn't have just died right frickin' there. My thoughts were racing, desperate to come up with a reason why the deer would have just died standing up in the middle of the road. 41, okay, I'm getting closer. 3 more. 3 more to go, I panted to myself, steeling myself to reality. Come on, man up. I shook myself, getting myself back into it, shaking away the fear and worry from inside me, pacing my breath to get it normal again. Sighing in relief, I pushed my head against the headrest, still looking out ahead. Get a grip, damn it, I whispered to myself, slamming the palm of my hand on the steering wheel. Speeding down the bumpy road, I got closer and closer. The mile marker signs grew in number. Mile marker 44. I was there. Still, I saw no car, no flashing lights, no sign of an accident. I slowed my speed and reached for the radio. Unit 4 calling county, I said into the radio. Not to my surprise, there was no answer. Figuring I should keep talking, maybe for my own sanity, or maybe someone could hear me, and I just couldn't hear them. Unit 4 calling county, show me in the area of the accident, searching at the time. I put the radio back into its holster, shining the spotlight into the darkness around me, looking to see if the car veered off the road. Other than pitch black, there was nothing. No vehicle, no dead animal, just pitch black. The SUV kept moving forward, although slow, fast enough to try to find this motorist. I wasn't sure if I was more excited to be done with this call or just to know other humans were actually real. With the events transpiring so far, I was skeptical. More dirt, more darkness, and more fear. I had been getting close now. The next mile marker sign had to be coming up. I shined the spotlight ahead of me, and finally, I found it. One car, hazard lights on in the rear, brake lights shining. I could almost cry. I was so happy that I'd finally found it, let alone finding another human. Unit 4 calling county, code 6 with the vehicle, I said into the radio. Why bother, I thought to myself. They ain't responding to you. No response, but no bother. I put the cruiser in park and got out. I shined my flashlight at the car, stepping quietly and slowly towards it. Light gray smoke billowed from the engine block, damaged from the struck animal. I bellowed. I stepped closer, moving my hand to my holster, pushing down on the hood and putting my thumb on the release. Sheriff's Department, I bellowed again. I stepped closer, shining my flashlight into the car. There was a man lying in the front seat, head rolled back against the headrest. Sir, do you need help? I asked, taking my hand off my gun and rushing to the driver's side door. I kept my flashlight shining on him, noting his eyes were clenched shut. I took a good look at the man. His face was covered in blood, his hands too. My breathing turned rapid again, taking my eyes off him for a second to look at the front of the car. There was no deer, but crap, there was a lot of blood. Too much blood for any animal to survive. I wanted to take a closer look, but was startled by the man in the front seat. I snapped back at him, shining the flashlight at him. "Sir, I'm with the sheriff's department. Are you all right?" I asked him, leaning down. The man's eyes snapped open and I gasped. There was no pupil, no iris, white like the moon that still didn't shine. A bloody hand opened the door, nails scratching against the plastic of the handle. Taking a step back, my hand found my holster again, thumbing at the release. "Sir, I think you need an ambulance," I said, trying to keep composed. The door swung open and I gulped. The hand that opened the door was frail, white like a ghost. The nails were longer than daggers, pointed at the end and covered in blood. I brought the flashlight back up to the man as he stepped out, groaning, groaning, and groaning. He towered over me, at least 7 feet tall. The flashlight illuminated his body. Tattered clothes stained in blood and other substances I prayed weren't human. His legs shook like a newborn deer, covered only by jeans that didn't fit, standing barefoot in front of me. I took another step back, hand on my gun and another on my light. "Hey, you've been in an accident. Think you need to sit down," I said. His head snapped left, right, up and down, almost inhuman in how fast he made them. His neck snapped to me, the silhouette eyes somehow piercing through me, shaking me to the core. "Sir?" I stammered. Then he smiled. The teeth. The teeth weren't human. They were sharp, sharp like shark teeth. They weren't neatly in rows, nor did they have any resemblance of structure, and by God, stained in blood and what looked like to be bone and muscle. "What the hell?" I whispered to myself. He took a step forward and I took a step back, stumbling but holding myself. "Stop," I beckoned, ordering him, although my voice faltered. The man, dare I say man, but the man stopped and looked at me with those white eyes. He opened his mouth, and it frickin' unhinged like a snake. Rows and rows of more blood-stained teeth shined through my light, and a howl of ungodly noises pierced through the night. The thing brought its head back and cried out louder, making a noise I've never heard of before. I took another step back and fell over, landing hard on my back. The thing's head snapped down on me, an evil grin spreading across its mouth that was way too big for its face. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. "Stop," I said loudly. 4 steps. He was getting closer. "Stop," I bellowed again, but he didn't. It didn't. I unholstered my handgun and pointed it at him. He didn't stop. I know he saw my gun. He must have. Most people will stop at the sign of a gun, but whatever the hell it was, didn't. The thing just took another step towards me. The cracking of its bones and body made me shiver in terror. My Glock was shaking in my hand, finger resting on the trigger guard. "I will shoot! Stop where you are!" I bellowed, getting up on one knee. Once more the man rolled his head back, letting out another guttural scream making my head hurt and my ears ring. The neck of the man snapped back down, an unholy noise came through and its eyes locked onto mine. 1 step, this time faster, closing the distance. I put my finger on the trigger and squeezed. The gunshot echoed through the night, the sharp recoil stinging my cold hand, and the hot shell bounced out of the gun next to me. I saw it hit him center mass, and yet he only stumbled. He took 2 steps back and he chuckled. The man frickin' chuckled. I stood up now, knowing I had distance, and tried the back pedal back towards my car. Another noise from him in those teeth. God, those frickin' teeth. He was now in a full sprint. I squeezed the trigger again, dropping my flashlight to get a better grip on my gun, opting to turn on the flashlight mounted on it. 3, 4, 5 gunshots, all center mass on him, and he only laughed and screamed at the noise that made my blood turn cold. The man stumbled back, looking down at his chest. There was no blood from where I shot him. I could see the holes, I could see where my rounds landed, and yet he didn't bleed. Screw this, I whispered to myself, finally making it back to the hood of my police car. I leaned against the ram bar while the man charged at me again, not stopping, only lolling his head back and letting out another screech. With ringing ears and 2 unsteadily hands, I fired again and again and again, pushing him back with each round that hit his torso. The gun snapped back and I pulled the trigger again, but nothing came out. A quick look over my gun determined I fired the entire magazine, all 18 rounds, and yet he didn't go down. He still stood there, flashing those razor-sharp and blood-covered teeth. I dropped the magazine quickly, snapping in a new one and releasing the slide, backpedaling towards my cruiser and getting in. Slamming the door, I put the cruiser in reverse, not daring to take my eyes off whatever the hell that thing was in front of me. Even through the roar of my engine, the man's scream pierced through, making me wince and shut my eyes to try to dull the sound. The dirt kicked up from my cruiser clouded the side of him, using this time to spin the cruiser around and floor the pedal, not caring the damage I was doing to the car. I kept looking in my rear view, and the only thing I saw was a cloud of dust and the emergency lights reflecting off it. The cruiser buckled and shook, making noises I knew weren't good for it, but I knew I had to get the hell out of there. Mile marker 45. No. I had to turn my car around. Those numbers shouldn't be going up, they should be going down. Mile marker 4666. I was shaking, panting, terrified like I had never felt before, pushing the cruiser as I sped through the night. The mirror showed nothing, only dust. I had to have lost it by now. I had to have. Mile marker. Hell. Tears clouded my vision. I wiped them away quickly, trying to keep my eyes on the road. The GPS showed I was going northbound. I was going the right way to go home, and yet the landscape proved otherwise. Mile marker 40. I was going the right way. I signed in relief, but didn't dare to slow my pace, keeping the pedal floored and the engine roaring. The dead deer was gone, nowhere to be seen where it laid when I came by earlier. I know that was the spot, and yet, it was as if the deer had simply gotten up and left right after I did. Shaking my head and wiping more tears, I kept moving, passing mile markers that finally showed the right numbers. Mile marker 30. I was getting closer, free from whatever hell I just wandered into. The hell? What the hell? I bellowed, slamming my palm onto the steering wheel. My watch lit up. It was still 3:03. Sobbing and shaking, I kept going, keeping my handgun on the passenger seat for easy access. God forbid that thing appeared again. There was the tree from earlier, and now it was on the right side of the road? How the hell did it just move like that? That was on the other side of the road. It can't be. Pull it together, Steele. Pull it together, I said to myself, doing the best to calm down while the road kept going on in front of me. Light. I saw light. A quick peek through the windshield showed the moon and stars, shining bright like they were before. I was getting closer to the main road. I had to make it. The SUV buckled under the dip in the road, items thrown all over the cabin as the car lurched back but kept steady. Here we go, we got this, I whispered to myself, reassuring myself that I had seen the end of this. There it was, the asphalt road, the old sign that showed Old Route 33. I made it, and as soon as the tires connected to the asphalt, I didn't dare look back, the same as I didn't dare to let my foot off the accelerator. Cars passed by, pulling over for the red and blues while I sped down the road. Pulling around back, I put the car in park, crying tears of pain and joy, knowing I made it back to safety. County calling Unit 4, the radio called out. I sniffled, so happy to hear the voice again, any voice really. Go ahead, I stammered through the tears. Unit 4, disregard the stranded motorist call. Caller states he got the car running and he's all set, no officers needed. I didn't dare question it. I didn't care to look into it. Unit 4, copy, I said through panting breaths. Copy. Showing you code 4. Time of call termination, 0303. I looked at the clock. It was actually 3:03 in the morning. My eyes never faltered from the clock, staring in fear until it turned. 3:04 a.m. I signed and put my head against the headrest. I made it. I frickin' made it out. I went home. I called out the rest of the night saying I was sick and needed to lie down. I went home and slept, pretending that it was all a bad dream. But I promise you, it wasn't a bad dream. It was real. The bullets fired from my gun were real, and the dirt and mud caked on my patrol car is real. I think I may have accidentally stumbled onto a gateway to hell. I don't know how else to describe the events that occurred, or how the time just didn't seem to change until I was free of that godforsaken road. A final note to you all, having survived what I did. If you ever find yourself in Montana, don't break down on Old Route 33.